Welcome to Pier-Glass Poetry Spotlight number 4, where we will once again visit one poem and its author. I'm Stan Galloway, your host, and today we're very pleased to look at Selfie with Sick Bacchus by Christopher Salerno. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
From New Jersey, Christopher is the author of 5 books of poetry, most recently The Mangrave, which won the Lexi Rudnitsky Award from Percy Books. Previous books include Deathbed Sex, winner of the Two Sylvias Press Chapbook Award, and from which today's poem comes. Sun and Urn, which won University of Georgia Poetry Prize, ATM, which won the Georgetown Poetry Prize, and Minima Heroic, which won the Mississippi Review Poetry Prize. A trade book, How to Write Poetry, a guided journal, was published by Callisto Media in 2020. Christopher, would you begin by reading the poem for us?
Sure. Selfie with Sick Bacchus. You climb a tree to eat the day's fruit until the boughs crap out, because your body must test the air to be art. Braid legs with branches until the sun dulls. I am no docent, but so much depends upon proper diffusion of light. It's not the moon, though it pursues you. It's how faces in paintings are lit like dead relatives in dreams, their eyes pairs of dark gems. Caravaggio painted over several of his apostles before giving Bacchus those sick eyes, that crown of vines. We like this kind of art, but to buy it would cost us everything. Like listening to the story of our own afterlife. Once the stars pull out and frost hits the field, honey crystallizes in the jar. We vie for a view of something real, oleander or our old selves, but both contain poison.
That ending never fails to strike at me. Thank you for that reading.
Thank you.
One of the first things I notice about this poem is the shift in place from the initial tree climbing scene into a museum, and then more subtly out of Caravaggio's painting and into the story of our own afterlife, as you call it. What do you find the effect is moving through these different headspaces?
Great question. As the poet, I'm not sure I have the perspective to talk as much about the effect, if we're talking about the effect on the reader. But I do say, however, that I'm interested in what Stevens calls ways of looking. I'm not a very linear person myself. And my poems tend to take a comprehensive or cumulative view of the world. I think of the great poem by Theodore Roethke called "The Waking," in which he says, "I learn by going where I have to go." I think my poems kind of, I invite them anyway to sort of follow whatever route they so desire. And so what I think the poem's images have in common is really sort of the tapestry of art and life, and whether the two can kind of occupy the same space and feed into each other back and forth. As artists, as poets, life feeds into our work, and our work feeds into our life. And I think, we kind of, I think the images in the poem, I hope, sort of have a kind of cumulative effect. And we think about art and life and Caravaggio, in this painting, I think it's he's, I think, in the hospital, and at this time, who knows why, but painting himself as Bacchus, and sick for whatever reason, we don't know, but maybe from excess or stress or who knows what. But so anyway, I hope that the images, various as they might be, sort of do come together in a larger tapestry, maybe.
Yes, I think that that sense of a journey that you talk about is also seen as a kind of layering. We enter. I mean, it's like strata in a cliffside, where you've got things that are all part of the same cliffside, but they are made up of distinct elements. And I think maybe that's part of what is going on. You make reference to the Caravaggio painting called Sick Bacchus, Young Sick Bacchus, Self Portrait as Bacchus. It has a number of names that people can look it up by. And one of the early biographers of Caravaggio pointed out that the painting was done using a mirror.
Mhm.
And I thought that was an interesting observation. And I wonder if there are ways that you might see the concept of looking into a mirror to create art
Mhm.
for the artwork also resonating with the creation of the poem.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, poem as mirror, I think,
Mm,
is a great kind of analog. I mean, I think every poem is a sort of mirror of the images, the questions, the obsessions that the artist or the poet has.
mm,
The figures that they have. These are all sort of mirrored back into the poem, and it's funny when you think about lyric poems and the way they kind of function. It's and language and so on. I mean, sometimes we look in the mirror and we're just looking to sort of fix our hair or straighten our tie, and sometimes we're looking in the mirror to sort of you know see who we really are. The difference between looking and seeing.
right.
You know, um, you know, uh, yeah. I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, this idea of of the mirroring back. I mean, I do think that has a great connection with poetry. And yeah, I have read that about this painting. And that fascinates me too. Just how sick he looks in the painting is
Right.
interesting to me too. Um, and the reason why he picks Bacchus in that time, it makes me wonder why he's sick, and again return to this idea of excess, and
Mm,
maybe he's kind of maybe he's sort of making a point about excess and in the painting, but yeah, the image, the mirror image, that we kind of project in our poems, and that's the idea of selfie too. That idea of posing for a selfie. Caravaggio kind of doing the very earliest version, one of the earlier versions of the selfie, maybe. Um, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, the whole social media craze with selfies
Hmm.
has really blossomed far beyond what could you could do with paint on a canvas, because the selfie is immediate, whereas the painter had to take days or weeks to get the image down.
Hmm.
So maybe it resonates even better for today's culture than it would previously.
Hmm.
Uh, I want to go back to the painting just for a minute. And yeah, ekphrastic poetry, as we know, derives from an artwork, usually a painting. And this particular painting is of a Roman personage, from Roman mythology, which adds another layer to the painting. And I wondered if you could remember in the composing process, where did this poem begin? Did it begin with looking at this painting? Did it begin by thinking about the myth? Did it begin with something different, and the painting was brought in later? I mean, I'm just curious about the kind of the sequencing of the brain in the composing process.
Yeah, that's great. It's funny. I've almost lost sight of this poem as an ekphrastic poem, but it certainly is, and it is a painting that I've had long had in my mind. Fascination with Caravaggio's work. His paintings are just unlike anything I've seen. The way he can capture emotion and tone, and obviously too the way he was able to use light and dark. I mean, his paintings. I mean, standing in front of them are just some of the most impactful, paintings to me as a young person. And I think I first found this painting in an art history course in college, and it always kind of stuck with me. But yeah, then I came across it again, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and that was the beginning of the poem for me. But thinking back process wise, I mean, I certainly can't claim to have written, this all in one sitting, or even executed this at some grand ekphrastic plan to write this. I think instead it was, I saw the poem, I saw the painting, and then I thought of the title, and then I had some of the imagery, and then, as it is with all my poetry, it really is a matter then of several visits to the poem, and seeing what it wants to be, where it wants to go, how those layers, that strata that you were talking about, how that begins to build through the sort of geological, evolution, right?
Right.
A poem to me is a negotiation, between what the poet knows and what the poet doesn't know. And so that leaves open, as you can imagine, quite a bit of space for what might happen once you've got an idea, right?
Right.
And so that's kind of, that's my best sort of accounting for how the poem came into being, is really just that initial spark of the painting, some of the imagery and language, the idea of the title, and then visits, visitations, maybe,
Right.
over a couple of years, really, of just kind of like seeing where it's going, what are the questions, what am I thinking about, and then the finalizing of it later on. So it was a long process, probably a couple of years, really.
Well, and I like the fact that you said that you've kind of lost sight of this poem as an ekphrastic poem, because there are so many other layers in the poem. It's not just about the painting. It's rather that the painting has been absorbed into something larger. And maybe that's what ekphrastic poems do, but not entirely. And I think that you're right that you don't have to know the painting to appreciate the poem. So, for example, line 6 says, "But so much depends upon." And that line just sitting there, that echoes the beginning of The Red Wheelbarrow by William Carlos Williams, a seminal American modernist poet from New Jersey. And I just wonder, how conscious are you of the influence of other writers when you're drafting a poem? And what poets would you say have influenced you the most?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, you mentioned the Williams line. That piece of, that's sort of one of the most famous bits of rhetoric in the modernist canon, right? I mean, that so much depends upon, right? It's been kind of spawned like a million memes and other poems and imitations, and from that little sort of baffling poem that people really always like to kind of play around with and talk about, in classes and so on. But yeah, that poem, yeah, why, yeah, how did that get in there? That's a good question. I think because I think maybe because I've always seen that poem as the closest poem to a painting that I've ever read, and maybe because I was in that moment, kind of entertaining the idea of painting, that maybe that's why I came in. That poem is sort of like a treatise on art to begin with. So much depends upon the red wheelbarrow, glazed in rainwater beside the white chickens. It's like almost like a Dada installation. Here's this red wheelbarrow, as if it were like an Armut kind of Duchamp moment. And that that probably came in because I just figured people would recognize it or something. I don't know, or I just thought it was safe, common language, common rhetoric, to kind of come in. I'm not sure, but it was considered, and yeah, in terms of influence, I mean, I'm sure most poets would say this too. I'm not really thinking about other poets when I'm writing, though. Then again, how can one not really see in themselves certain writing tendencies that they have that remind them of eras or of poetry? If I put an apostrophic O in a poem, like suddenly it's gone romantic, right? If I take out certain other elements and foreground these images, and suddenly it becomes modernist, right? And
Right.
if I take all narrative out and I'm building language, and it's like a language poem, so the more you get to know those different eras and that those times and tendencies, and yeah, they probably you probably would say like, oh, that's too romantic, I don't want that, delete, or
Right.
anyway, so that kind of stuff does come in, right? Yeah, poets that have influenced me, if I kind of take it through time, and let's see, like Emily Dickinson, my favorite poet, Wallace Stevens and Williams, Marion Moore, Lucille Clifton, Peter Gizzi, a living poet, great living poet. And then all my teachers, whose work I got to read with a kind of second sense, because they were also voices in my head. So that work became more profound. I think that happens with teachers. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's a beautiful list of poets that you've given. And I've read and enjoyed all of them except the last, which is a new poet for me that I'll have to look up. And I recognize that often we don't consciously make connections with our reading history, what we've read and how it impacts us. It's only in retrospect at a moment like this that you say, oh yes, that's William Carlos Williams. I wasn't thinking about his shadow behind me, but yes, it's there. I want to go to the end of the poem. In an interview in 2018 with Field magazine, you said that, like Wallace Stevens, you came to see poetry as a means of redemption. The ending of Selfie with Sick Bacchus, with its reference to the poison of oleander and our old selves, seems far from redemptive to me. And I wonder, do you see this as a poem of hope?
Short answer, no. Long answer, yes. Short answer, no. If you look at that painting of Caravaggio as Sick Bacchus, he certainly looks like crap. Not very helpful. Not very hopeful, rather.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, every poem is a poem of hope, or carries hope. Why? Because that kind of the organization of language, the exercising compression that poetry gets into, the carving out of figure and rhythm, that kind of work, just doing that work is hopeful. To me, that devotion to art in that way is definitely hopeful. So the hope, I think, comes later.
I just wonder if I might extend what you've said then to the act of writing a poem is an act of hope, regardless of the content.
Yeah. So the organization, that act, that devotion itself, I think, is what's hopeful.
Yeah.
Whether or not the content and the meat of the poem is a hopeful one. I feel like that the sense of creation and the arc of those ideas next to all the other ones, as the poet builds and builds, say a manuscript. I mean, that to me is very hopeful. That kind of organization, that kind of crafting, that sort of expression, and those rhythms and forms and figures, all that to me is that deliberation behind that. To me, that's all very hopeful, because it means that we believe in something.
Yeah.
Right. And what that's something to hang a hat on, right? But yeah, the poem itself, though, yeah, it's definitely wrestling with the sense of how we got here,
Yeah.
and our regrets, and is a selfie really real?
Mm.
Is it a real impression of ourselves, or is it a pose? You
Yeah.
know,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
and how does that and how does that you know connect with our older selves, and the regrets that we've had, and about our lives, and where we've been and what we've done. But to me, the hopefulness is in the act of writing, the
Yeah.
act of organizing, and the language, and forming it.
Well, and I hadn't thought of this until you just said this. And through my filter, what I heard is that a selfie is a moment of ourselves. It's no longer the present self. It's who we were at that moment in the past. Uh,
Mhm.
and looking back at all the people we have been through our selfies, might be instructive. It
Mhm.
might bring hope,
Mhm.
even if it was a low moment.
Yeah, that gives us a chance to kind of zoom out and sort of think about the larger sense of where we've been and where we're heading,
Right.
and
Yeah.
how we might find art in that,
Hmm.
or art in our arc, as we kind of pursue and try to make art out of our lives. We
Yeah.
climb that tree, every day, and
Mm.
to get that fruit, right, and
Right.
form ourselves and into something pretty, and take a photo. Uh, I don't take many selfies, but
Right.
but I am interested in that phenomenon, uh, and just seeing how far back it really,
Right.
they just lack the technology. I think Caravaggio would have been fine with his iPhone at some times too, right?
Yes. Well, it's easier to do. You can look at your phone instead of the mirror.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who needs that, right? Who needs that?
Right. Is there anything you'd like to add before we wind up for today?
No, just thank you
Yeah.
for the conversation. It's been
Yeah.
really
Excellent.
fun to dig into this poem.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Christopher's poems have appeared in the New York Times Magazine, New Republic, American Poetry Review, New England Review, and elsewhere. He serves as professor of creative writing at William Patterson University. For Pier-Glass Poetry, I'm Stan Galloy, wishing you a poetic day.